She's agile. Look out. All right. So what we'll do first is give 1 minute for opening statements. And Judge Hillier, let's start with you, please.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Bruce Hillier. For the last 12 years, I've served as a King County Superior Court judge. From 2008 through 2010, I was the presiding judge, which means I was responsible for the oversight of the largest court system in the state of Washington. It was 62,000 cases and 66 judicial officers. I have about 100 judges supporting me in this race, including every judge on the Court of Appeals in Division I, and judges throughout the state of Washington. I have experience as a lawyer for 20 years. I have 12 years of judicial experience, and I believe fervently that the thing that is so special about our judicial system is that it is the one place in our society in which we need to present the opportunity for the least powerful to seek justice, even if it is against the most powerful. And that requires a professional judiciary that is fair to everyone and that is experienced. And I believe that I am the best person in this race to defeat Richard Sanders, who purports to be a libertarian. He purports to be a libertarian unless you happen to be a woman and value the right to choose, or you happen to be gay and want civil rights.
Thank you. And John Leitenberg, let's please hear from you next. 1 minute opening statement.
Thank you. I'm John Leitenberg. I feel like I should be standing up in court. I'm John Leitenberg. I came and spoke to you before. I'll be very brief. 2 things you need to know about me, because you need to know how people are going to vote in court. You need to know if they're going to represent your values or not. You can't be guessing. It's going to be vitally important. I have been a lawyer on the side of working class people all my life. When I left the executive's office 3 years ago, I went back into small-time practice with my 2 sons, representing working people. Unfortunately, I found a lot of people who weren't working. So now I'm representing people in forfeitures for free because they're out in their homes. One couple's living in their car. And I'm suing different banks for bad forfeitures, including the Bank of America. I have the most experience in law of anybody running. In fact, nobody on the Supreme Court has tried a death penalty case both as a prosecutor and a public defender. I've done that in criminal law. I've represented people in civil cases. I'm admitted to the United States Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, all the way down to the district courts and 2 tribal courts. The last thing you need to remember about me is I'm the most experienced candidate, and the second thing, rather, is I'm not the guy that represents Bank of America. I'm the guy that sues Bank of America.
Thank you. And just a warning to all candidates, our timekeeper was extremely forgiving that time, but he can be ruthless. Cheryl Gordon-McLeod, can you get your opening statement, please?
Thank you. Cheryl Gordon-McLeod, and I am running for the open seat on the Washington Supreme Court. I have handled hundreds of cases in front of the Washington Supreme Court and in front of every other similar appellate court in this state, from the Courts of Appeals to the Ninth Circuit, on up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I am, of course, admitted in all of those courts. I am the candidate who has handled more cases in front of the appellate courts than the others as an attorney. I didn't start at the top. I started at the Public Defender's Office, and I chose to do appellate work after the Public Defender's Office because I felt that that was the place where I could best give voice to those who are traditionally excluded from the justice system. Whether I was representing a woman who was denied pregnancy disability leave rights, or whether I was representing a criminal defendant, I have always stood up for the underdog, and I am proud of that. Cheryl Gordon-McLeod.
Thank you. So this next question, you'll have 1 minute each to respond. Let's just go in opposite order. So Cheryl, we can start with you. Do you feel the war on drugs has been effective or ineffective? And what are your thoughts on I-502?
My personal opinion on the war on drugs is probably unimportant for how I would decide each case in front of the court, because I would decide each case based on the facts and based on the law in the case. What we have seen of the war on drugs in this state and nationally, though, is that it's basically an attack on minorities, and it's been called the new Jim Crow. The contacts with the criminal justice system, the increased minority contacts with the criminal justice system because of our drug laws, the inequality of that as shown by, most recently, by the report on to the Washington Supreme Court from the Commission on Juvenile Contacts with the law, substantiates this and shows that even here in our state, the war on drugs is becoming a disaster. I would also say that altering some of the laws on drugs would go along, decriminalizing some of them might go a long way towards funding the justice system. My time is up.
Thank you. And Bruce, if you could go next, please.
I think the war on drugs has been a massive failure. I think that we've paid as a society in innumerable ways. I've had to preside over trials. I've seen people, had to sentence people to prison when I didn't think that was the right result, but I was obligated to do that. I think we need to fundamentally reassess the approach that we're taking to drugs and learn something from other countries who have treated this more as a public health issue than as a criminal justice issue. However, with respect to the initiative, as you noticed a minute ago, I'm extremely critical of Richard Sanders because I think he's an ideologue with a personal political agenda, and I don't think that's an appropriate role for a Supreme Court justice. And consequently, I don't think it's appropriate for a Supreme Court justice to take a public position with respect to a decision on an initiative that is up to the voters, especially when that same initiative may very well present itself to the court. And if you express an opinion on it, you'd be disqualified from ruling on it.
I also think that our war on drugs, if that's what you want to call it, has been a disaster. But one of the things I think you have to look at in candidates is easy for everybody to say, what have they actually done? When I was the prosecuting attorney, I sent my staff to California to look at the first drug court in the nation. And we came back and adopted the drug court in Pierce County. And I had to meet personally with one of the judges and convince him to be the drug court judge. And he looked at me and said, you want me to let people out of jail who are using drugs and put them in treatment? I'll never get reelected. And I said, I'll work for your reelection. We need this. This system we have isn't working. I also called the first meth summit in the state to bring attention to the meth crisis that was ahead of us then. Now we're in the midst of it. We need to think smarter about these things. We need to work smarter. We need to have judges that actually know how to get something done along that line. I've done it. My history is there with having done it in the past. And the last thing I'll say is I helped write the 1989 Drug Act, which put a soda tax, pop tax, to fund drug treatment. The industry did away with it.
Okay, thank you. And that was our timekeeper. You know, he starts his applause right on time. All right, John, if you could start us with this one, please. 1 minute to respond, and you'll all three get the chance to answer this question. A bill has been introduced the last couple of sessions, specifically about public financing of judicial races. With Citizens United, there is a likelihood that out-of-state money and lots of it will affect your race. What do you see as short-term solutions to the financing of judicial races in Washington?
If you're asking me where the money's going to come from, I don't know. I mean, my wife was in the 29th district representing, didn't get home until 8 a.m. this morning. So I'm not going to tell her where to get the money to do it. But I absolutely believe in the judicial races being funded all the way from the top to the bottom, being funded by the public and limited to a certain amount of money. And I think that's the only way we're going to keep corruption out of the courts. One of the reasons that I'm running for the court this year is because I'm afraid that bad guys are going after the courts like Jim McDermott was talking about here, and I want to get there ahead of them. I've been a public figure for a lot of years. You know where I stand. I think you know I represent the values that you represent. If you want somebody there who's going to think like that, then you better make sure you vote for somebody that you can trust and not guess about what they might do when they get on the court.
I see a real threat to our judicial system and our democracy as a result of the Citizens United decision and the complete unleashing of private and corporate funding for campaigns. I think it could be a serious threat to the integrity and the independence of our judiciary. So far, we've largely been spared that in Washington. In Texas, for instance, a Supreme Court seat is almost for sale. It costs about $5 million. And God forbid we should ever get to that system here in Washington. I think that the legislature and the people should consider some way of financing campaigns to make sure that we never have Supreme Court seats for sale in Washington as we have witnessed in other states. And if something isn't done, eventually the forces of darkness will be at our door.
I share Judge Hilliard's concern about money taking over judicial races, not just because of who it lands on the bench, but because of the impact it has on those judges' decisions. There was a case that was in the U.S. Supreme Court this past year out of West Virginia, which brought to the court the question of whether a judge had to recuse, had to get themselves off of a case because there was a huge donor who dwarfed all the other donors who was on one side of the case. And the Supreme Court agreed that because of the need for not just impartiality, but also the appearance of fairness, a judge can't be sitting on a case when there's a huge donor who's in front of him or her. So I share that concern. I share the U.S. Supreme Court's concern with the apparent appearance of fairness, not just the actual fairness of judges. And I think getting money out of these races would go a long way towards ensuring that.
Let's just go the opposite direction this time. This question, if you could just answer 30 seconds, this is just to get a better sense of who you are. What kind of jobs, interests, and volunteer opportunities did you pursue during school?
Well, during high school, the volunteer work that we did was we formed the Springfield Gardens High School Women's Liberation Club, and we brought the Planned Parenthood School in, and we got the first newsprint copies of our bodies ourselves from Manhattan and brought them to Queens, where we were in public high school, and distributed them. I've worked during college. I had union jobs after college and before law school, and I worked during law school representing indigent prisoners.
When I was in college, my principal activity was doing something to get the United States out of Vietnam. And I was fortunate enough to be on the East Coast, so I appeared in Washington and a number of times when there were almost 1 million people on the square. It was really an amazing state of our democracy. When I was in law school, this is before I became a judge, I was the field coordinator for Charles Warner for mayor in 1977, and I got involved in Democratic campaigns, but I can't do that now because I wear a judge's robe.
Well, I came from a family of 16 children, so my parents weren't going to put me through college and law school. What I did is I worked in the low IBEW around the hall and worked my way through college and law school. The kind of jobs I held, they were union jobs, because I come from a strong union family. My union roots go back 4 generations in Tacoma. What did I do with my spare time? When I was in law school, I volunteered to work for the National Organization for Women to fight, to get them to take the test to be a firefighter.
And actually, we'll have Judge Hilliard start with this one. I don't know if we've started with him too many times. 1 minute to answer this question. Do you believe there's underrepresentation of women or people of color in the court system? And if so, how would you work to correct that problem?
Yeah, yes, I do. I think that as a society, we have come a long way to address some of the sins of our society, that we have not fully addressed the vestiges of racism and sexism. I am on the board of the King County Bar Foundation. We raise between $5 and $6 million a year. One of our principal goals for that money is minority scholarships. I was at a law firm tonight where I met a woman who is a superstar young African-American lawyer at a major law firm who was the recipient of one of our scholarships. It's something that we need to dedicate ourselves to renew our dedication until the judicial system mirrors the society, because only then will the people in our society look at the judicial system with full confidence that they can get a fair shake from people like them.
Sure, we can take this question next.
Again, I actually share many of Judge Hilliard's views on this. I do think that women and minorities are dramatically underrepresented in the judicial system, even in the state of Washington, particularly on the superior courts and in the courts of appeals. I think that I also think what's underrepresented is the voice for people who have not had that kind of access to the system. So it's not just a matter of increasing gender or increasing race representation, but increasing sensitivity to the issues faced by the communities that have been traditionally excluded from the judicial system. I think that getting more women and more minorities into the judicial system starts before law school. I've taught at the law school level at Seattle University School of Law, and I've been part of efforts to bring in minorities and women and to further their interest in law. Thank you.
Once again, it's easy to say, I believe in all these things. I want to tell you what I actually did about these things. When I became the prosecuting attorney, there were no women, well, there were 2, and no minorities in the office of the prosecutor's office, either as lawyers or any of the staff. I adopted affirmative action policy, which was then attempted to be overturned by the Republican executive of the county. And I insisted on it, and I got it done, and I brought people to the office. And I also said, we are also going to treat sexual minorities the same way. And I hired a good friend of mine named Joe McDermott. You might have heard of him. Councilmember Joe McDermott. We've known each other more than 20 years. Joe has endorsed me solely for this job because he knows what he can expect out of me on the court. Lastly, I'm proud to say that the Pierce County Minority Bar, people who have known me for 35 years of law practice, have given me the qualification of exceptionally well qualified for the court.
All right, I'm going to get greedy here and see if we can fit 2 more questions in. Actually, 1 question in your closing statements. But that means you're only going to have 30 seconds for each. So this next question, John, let's start with you. 30 seconds. What do you believe are the causes of the high rates of minority incarceration?
Well, again, I'll tell you what I did about that. In our juvenile system, we saw that there were way more minorities being brought in. So we volunteered to have a study of our juvenile court system when I was a prosecutor to see what we were doing wrong. What was there racism built into the system? And we found some instances of it, and we trained staff and we corrected for the problem. And I think that's the kind of reason that the minority bar is rated to be so well qualified.
Economic deprivation, some institutional racism, prejudices, and stereotypes that we haven't shaken ourselves completely out of at different levels of the system, and a lack of support services that we provide to make up for disintegrating families. I serve as a juvenile court judge. I see these kids every single day, and it is rare that I see 2 parents. Almost never do I see 2 parents with the kids who come before me who are largely children of color and almost 100% economically disadvantaged.
Well, the statistics show that it tends to start with an increased rate of stops of minorities as compared with whites. After stopping, an increased rate of arrests versus letting go of minorities as compared to whites. Once arrested, an increased rate of prosecution of minorities as compared to whites. Once prosecuted, an increased rate of stiffer sentences for minorities as compared to whites. What I've done about that is to raise each of these issues in my criminal defense appellate practice, whether it impacted sentencing, or whether it impacted the prosecution decision.
Thank you. So now, we do have time for closing statements. Only 30 seconds, I apologize. And Judge Hillier, if you'd like to get us started.
Thank you very much for your attention tonight. I have 12 years of experience as a Superior Court judge. I've tried every kind of case that goes before the Supreme Court. I've tried child abuse, I've tried criminal, parental, probate, medical malpractice, securities fraud. I too am rated exceptionally well qualified, not only by the Pierce County Bar Association, but by 5 of the bar associations. I'm the candidate who has a track record. And there's one more thing too that's really important. I know how to work with judges. You're no good in the Supreme Court unless you get 4 judges to agree with you. I have the experience to do that.
I credit the other candidates' experience, but the job we're running for is the Washington Supreme Court. My experience is arguing cases for 25 years before the Washington Supreme Court and the other similar appellate courts. I'm not a career politician. For a career, I have given voice to those who have had the least voice in the courts, whether it be because of indigency, imprisonment, or minority status. And that is what I will do if I'm elected to the court.
Thank you. Everybody here is qualified to be on the court. Nobody who just got out of law school is stupid enough to try to run for the court. So what does it mean to you? You have to say, how do we know how people are going to react to issues in front of the court? That's what you really want to know. With me, you don't have to guess what's going to happen when I'm there in the Supreme Court. That's why Ron Sims is giving me a sole endorsement. That's why Bob Drew is giving me a sole. That's why Rob Costin, head of the Black Collective, is giving me a sole endorsement. They know who I am. They know what I stand for. I ask for your sole endorsement, just like the 31st District, just like the 28th District. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks all 3 of you for coming out tonight, and we'll look forward to making a decision in May.